Jasmine never thought she'd return to Aspen, especially not under these circumstances. She's 30 now and forensic auditor who spends her days hunting down financial criminals. But coming back to her family felt like a step back in time. The blizzard outside howled, but inside the air was thick with tension. Her parents, Marcus and Eleanor, were cold distant, and her brother Caleb, well, he was busy cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Jasmine was hoping for a warm welcome, maybe a hug. But what she got instead was a thick legal document slid across the mahogany table by her mother. "Sign it," Eleanor said with a shaky voice. "It's a voluntary conservatorship. Admit you're mentally unstable. Give us control of your assets and we'll protect your brother." The words hit like a punch, but Jasmine wasn't the helpless daughter they remembered. She was no longer afraid to stand up to her family. Jasmine stared down at the papers her mother had just slid in front of her. Her fingers brushed the thick legal document, and the reality of what was being asked of her settled into her bones. A voluntary conservatorship. Her mother wanted her to admit she was mentally unstable, to hand over her life's work, her assets, everything she had fought so hard to build. The words seemed surreal, like something out of a bad movie, but this was her life, and they were playing with it like a game, a deadly one. Her mother, Eleanor, didn't look at her with the concern Jasmine remembered from her childhood. Instead, her eyes were cold, calculating like a lawyer trying to win a case. Jasmine couldn't hide the shock, the sting of betrayal that rippled through her chest. They wanted to control her. They weren't trying to protect her, they were trying to save themselves. The house, the business, the debts, they all depended on her signing this piece of paper. Her father, Marcus, stood behind her, silent but looming. The man who had once been her protector, the one she'd relied on for stability, now felt like a distant stranger. He locked the front door behind her when she entered, trapping her inside. And now he was watching her, waiting for her to crumble under the pressure. Jasmine could see it in his eyes, the satisfaction of knowing they had the upper hand. They thought they were cornering her, but they didn't realize who they were dealing with now. She wasn't the scared little girl who used to hide in her room. She wasn't the one who had let their words tear at her self-worth. She had spent the last decade tearing down fraud, uncovering lies, and bringing justice to those who thought they could escape the truth. She had become something her family couldn't manipulate. "I won't sign it," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions surging inside her. Her mother's eyes flickered a momentary flash of anger before it was masked by that fake concern. Jasmine could almost feel the weight of her mother's disappointment, like she had failed some unspoken test. But Jasmine wasn't playing by their rules anymore. "You don't understand," her mother insisted, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't just about you. We're trying to save your brother." Caleb. Her brother sat in the corner, cleaning his fingernails with a hunting knife. A twisted grin played on his lips, the kind that made Jasmine's stomach turn. He wasn't worried, not at all. His smirk was the last thing she expected. The whole situation was suffocating, like being trapped in a room where every move was calculated and every word had been carefully planned. "No," Jasmine said firmly. "This isn't about Caleb. This is about you and Dad trying to save your own skin." She stood up the chair, scraping across the floor as she moved to the fireplace. The flames danced and crackled, casting flickering shadows across the room. "You think this is a game? Jasmine continued, her voice quieter now but still sharp. She held the papers in her hand, watching them curl in the heat. "You're trying to take everything from me, my life, my work, all of it." Her mother flinched as if the words physically hurt her. Jasmine could see the fear in her eyes now, a fear she hadn't expected to see. She had always thought her mother was the one pulling the strings, the one in control. But here, in this moment, it was clear Eleanor was just as desperate as the rest of them. Jasmine had been so blinded by the need for validation, the desire to be loved by her family, that she hadn't seen how toxic they had become, how deep the manipulation ran. "You can't do this," Marcus barked, his voice snapping like a whip. He stepped forward, trying to intimidate her, but Jasmine wasn't backing down. She felt the cold air from the fire, the heat of the moment pressing in on her chest, but she didn't flinch. The weight of her parents' expectations, their control was suffocating, but she wasn't going to be suffocated anymore. They had underestimated her. They had thought she was still the little girl who would bend under the pressure, who would let them dictate her life. But that wasn't who she was anymore. "You always thought you could control me," she said, her voice low but full of resolve. "But I've learned what it means to fight, to be strong." She turned to face her father, locking eyes with him. "I don't need you. I never needed you to survive." The silence in the room was deafening. Her parents, the ones who had raised her, the ones she had once trusted, were standing there trapped by their own greed. They had become the very thing they had once warned her about: predators. They thought they could control her, break her down, but they didn't realize that, in the end, it was them who had become the prey. Jasmine knew it now. She wasn't their victim. She was their reckoning. Jasmine stood there, her heart pounding as she stared at the family that had, for years, been the source of her confusion, guilt, and frustration. But this wasn't the same Jasmine who had walked into this house. She wasn't a girl hiding from her father's rages or cowering under her mother's manipulations. No, she was an auditor now, and she had spent years tracking down financial fraud, reading between the lines, discovering secrets that others tried to hide. And she wasn't afraid to pull the curtain back on her family's lies. For the longest time, Jasmine had wanted to believe that her family wasn't as bad as everyone said. She had tried to see them through the lens of love, of misguided good intentions, but it was all a lie. Now, standing in front of them, her mother trembling and her father puffed up with his usual air of false authority, Jasmine realized the truth. They weren't just manipulative, they were predators, and their need for control had no bounds. "You think you have control, don't you?" Jasmine said, her voice a cold, controlled whisper. Her father's eyes narrowed his expression, turning from one of authority to something more dangerous, more calculating. "You think you've trapped me, that I'll sign these papers and give you everything you want, but you don't realize this isn't your game anymore." Her mother, Eleanor, flinched slightly at the shift in Jasmine's tone, but it was Caleb who reacted first. He looked up from his knife, a smirk curling at the corner of his lips. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a joke, that Jasmine was just playing hard to get, but this wasn't some teenage rebellion. This was something else. Jasmine didn't need to explain. She could see the gears turning in her father's head. He was realizing that something had shifted, that Jasmine wasn't acting like a daughter who needed to be coddled and controlled. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. "You're not going to sign those papers, are you?" Marcus said, his voice low, dangerous. He stepped closer, and for a moment, Jasmine thought she might back down, but she didn't. She didn't need to back down. The papers her mother had given her were just the beginning. She reached into her waterproof briefcase and pulled out a crisp blue folder. She didn't slide it across the table like they expected. No. Jasmine slammed it down, the sound echoing in the cold room, the force of it sending a crack through the tension. Her father's eyes darted to the folder, but before he could ask what it was, Jasmine spoke, her voice calm, but laced with a quiet power that sent a shiver through the air. "You're trying to leverage this house to pay off Caleb's debts, right? You thought you could trap me here and use me as your pawn, but you forgot something. I don't just audit tax returns. I track distressed assets, and your son's debt was flagged in my system." Her father's face twisted in confusion, but Jasmine didn't give him the chance to respond. She opened the folder and pulled out a notarized promissory note, the one she had bought just the day before. The room went still as Jasmine placed it on the table with the same calculated precision she'd used in every deal she'd ever made. "I bought Caleb's $1.2 million debt yesterday morning. It's mine now. And since Marcus, put this house up as collateral for his business loans 3 years ago, I own the lien on this property. I own this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine could hear the crackling of the fire in the background, the howling winds outside, but inside the air was thick with tension, with realization. Caleb's smirk faltered. His hand froze mid-air, the knife still held loosely in his grip. For the first time, he looked uncertain. His voice trembled as he spoke. "What do you mean you own it?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She locked eyes with her brother, the one who had always played the victim, always danced through life on the backs of others. "I own the debt, Caleb. I own the house, and I'm your primary creditor now." Her father's face was turning pale. The arrogance that had defined him for years was slipping away, replaced by something close to fear. He stepped back, trying to regain his composure, but the damage had already been done. The power had shifted, and there was nothing he could do about it. Jasmine let the words sink in, watching her family scramble to process what was happening. They had tried to play her, to trap her in their web of lies and manipulation, but now she had the upper hand. Now she was the one holding all the cards. "You missed 3 consecutive payments, Dad." Jasmine continued, her voice steady. "As of this morning, I've exercised my right to accelerate the loan. You're in default, and I'm foreclosing on my collateral. You have exactly 60 minutes to pack up your things and get out of my house. I don't care if it's a blizzard outside. You're leaving." Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the papers, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. Then he looked at his wife, his eyes filled with a kind of desperation Jasmine hadn't expected. Eleanor, for her part, seemed to shrink back, the reality of the situation crashing down on her, but Marcus wasn't the type to back down easily. His anger flared. He stepped forward again, his voice rising, but Jasmine stood her ground. "You think you can just take everything from me?" he spat. "You think you can just walk in here and take control of everything?" "I'm not taking anything," Jasmine said, her voice still calm but unyielding. "I'm just taking back what's mine. This house, these assets, they were always mine. You just didn't know it yet." The silence that filled the room now wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a predator realizing it had stepped into a trap. Jasmine had played her hand, and it was perfect. For a moment, her family was lost in the weight of the truth. The tables had turned and Jasmine was the one holding the power. She had the debt, the legal documents, and the knowledge to bring them all down. And for the first time, it was clear she wasn't the one being trapped anymore. She was the one who held the key to their freedom or their destruction. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus stepped back, his expression shifting between anger and calculated confidence. He knew how to play the game of property law, how to use loopholes to his advantage, and Jasmine could feel him preparing for a fight he thought he had already won. He wasn't going to let her take everything from him, not without a fight. And he thought he had the perfect weapon to turn the tables in his favor tenant rights. "You think you can just kick me out of my own house?" Marcus sneered, his voice low and steady. "You're the creditor, fine, but you've forgotten one very important thing. This is our home. We have tenant rights. Do you know what that means?" Jasmine couldn't help but feel a flicker of disbelief. She'd been prepared for this. Marcus always had a trick up his sleeve, but this was ridiculous. He was trying to shield himself with tenant law, trying to use a system to avoid facing the consequences of his own greed. And as he went on listing all the legal rights he believed he still had, she realized something even more unsettling. He wasn't just desperate, he was dangerous. "You can't just throw us out, Jasmine." He continued, his voice gaining strength. "You have to give us 30 days written notice. Then you have to file for a court hearing, and after that, the sheriff schedules an eviction. That's how it works. Not just because you say so." He paused, watching her carefully as if expecting her to falter. "I know how the law works. Do you?" Jasmine's jaw tightened as she listened. He was right about one thing: tenant rights did protect residents in certain situations. But she wasn't dealing with tenants, and she wasn't playing by his rules. She was playing a different game now when he didn't understand. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cutting through his rant like a knife. "This isn't a residential home. This is a business, and business rules are different." She could see the confusion flash in her father's eyes for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by a hint of skepticism. He didn't understand what she was saying, not yet, but Jasmine was ready to explain. "You registered this property as a business, Dad. Peak Altitude Hospitality, an LLC that runs this place as a short-term rental." Jasmine continued watching her father closely. His smirk faltered. He had always prided himself on his tax strategies, but she had dug deeper. Jasmine wasn't just an auditor. She was a forensic auditor, and she had followed the trail. "You've been hiding behind business law, trying to avoid paying property taxes by claiming this place isn't a home. And that means..." Jasmine paused, letting the silence stretch before finishing the sentence. "Tenant rights don't apply here." Marcus's face twisted in surprise and anger. He hadn't expected her to come at him with the very thing he thought he had under control. He had always been the one to play with the rules, to dance around the law when it suited him. But Jasmine wasn't playing by the same rules. She was using his own greed against him. "That doesn't matter." Marcus grunted, taking a step toward her. He could see her resolve feel the shift in the power dynamic, and it unnerved him. He wasn't used to feeling this way. He wasn't used to losing. "Even if this is a business, we're still residents. We still have rights. You're not just going to throw us out into the snow." Jasmine didn't back down. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on her father as if daring him to challenge her. "You're not tenants, Marcus," she said, her voice steady but filled with authority. "You're employees. You're listed as on-site maintenance staff living here as part of your employment. And when you're terminated for a cause which you are, you lose your right to stay." The room went still. Marcus took another step forward, his face flushed with frustration, but Jasmine was already several steps ahead of him. She had anticipated his every move. She had been ready for this fight long before he had. "You can't fire us," Marcus spat. "You're just playing games. This is all just paperwork." But Jasmine could see the cracks beginning to show. He was desperate, trying to hold on to the illusion of control. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the termination letters she had prepared, the ones she had expected to use against him, the ones she had planned to present to a judge. But now they were the weapon she would use to finish the job. "I'm not playing games," Jasmine replied calmly. "This is your termination notice. As of this moment, you're no longer employed here, and as a result, you have no legal right to stay. You're trespassing now, Marcus. You and Mom both. You have 60 minutes to leave, or I'll call the sheriff." Marcus's face contorted in disbelief. The words didn't seem to register, not immediately. He blinked, as if processing what had just happened. "You can't do this," he muttered under his breath, the confident facade slipping. "I already did," Jasmine said, leaning back in her chair, crossing her legs and watching him unravel. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating as Marcus tried to find a way out, a loophole, a way to regain control. But there was no escape now. Jasmine had taken the upper hand. She had turned his own tricks back on him, and now he had nowhere to go. Jasmine was done playing by her father's rules. She had outmaneuvered him at his own game, and the realization settled in this was her moment. She wasn't just the creditor. She was the one in control now. The power had shifted completely, and Marcus could do nothing but stand there helpless. As the game they had been playing for so long finally came to an end, Jasmine had always known her family was difficult, but she never imagined they'd go this far. As the confrontation continued with her father pushing back against her legal maneuvering and her mother's fake concern, wearing thin Jasmine began to realize something much darker was unfolding. It wasn't just about the house or the debt, it was about control. It was about power, and the moment the front door slammed shut, Jasmine felt the air in the room shift. Caleb's smirk had never looked so sinister. Her eyes flicked to the door, and it hit her all at once. The blizzard outside was no longer a natural hazard. It was a trap, a barrier designed to keep her here in this house with no way out. She wasn't just fighting for control over her family's finances. She was fighting for her freedom. She was being held hostage, and until that moment, she hadn't fully understood just how deep her family's manipulation ran. She took a step back, her gaze moving between her parents, Caleb, and the locked door. Her heart began to race as the full weight of their intentions sank in. They didn't just want her to sign a piece of paper. They wanted to break her, to force her into submission. They wanted to isolate her controller, make her believe that this was her only option. But Jasmine wasn't going to play their game. She wasn't their victim anymore. She could feel the shift inside herself, an emotional pivot from confusion to cold clarity. They had underestimated her for too long, and now the tables were about to turn. She took a slow breath, trying to steady her racing mind, but the reality was sinking in fast. Her family wasn't playing by the same rules anymore. They weren't interested in money or property. They were willing to destroy everything. Her life, her career, her freedom, just to keep their control. They were playing a dangerous game, one where she wasn't just a pawn, She was a threat, and they were going to do whatever it took to neutralize her. That's when the phone call came. Eleanor moved toward the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up the landline, dialing without a second thought. Jasmine watched her mother's expression shift from feigned distress to something colder, more calculating. There was no real worry in her eyes, only a thinly veiled attempt to set the stage for something much darker. 911. Eleanor said, her voice trembling but steady. My daughter's having a breakdown. She's unstable. She's going to hurt us. She has a gun. You need to send someone here. She's dangerous. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Jasmine's stomach dropped. The realization hit like a blow to the chest. Her mother wasn't just trying to get her to sign the papers. She was setting her up. A false 911 call. A complete fabrication. And in that moment, Jasmine understood just how far they were willing to go to destroy her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. This wasn't just a fight for control over property, it was a fight for her life. They were trying to frame her, turn the law against her, and send her to jail. They wanted her locked away, removed from the picture entirely. But Jasmine wasn't going to let them win. The room grew colder as the sound of sirens began to fill the distance, and her father, for the first time, seemed unnerved. The walls that had always felt like a fortress now felt like a prison, and the people she had once called family were no longer her allies. She locked eyes with her mother, whose face was twisted with triumph. But Jasmine saw the cracks now, the desperation behind the mask. Eleanor was playing a game too, but this time, Jasmine had seen through it. Caleb moved toward the door, his knife still in hand, but his grin was gone. The same grin that had once made Jasmine's blood run cold now felt like the smile of a man who realized his own game was slipping away. He hadn't thought this through. None of them had. Jasmine felt something shift inside her, a cold, determined clarity taking over. They wanted her to break. They wanted her to panic, to flee, to make a mistake. But that wasn't going to happen. You think I'm going to let you do this? She said, her voice low but firm. You think you can trap me here with a fake 911 call with your lies? You've made one mistake, Mom. You think you're in control, but I'm the one who's been auditing you all along. Jasmine's fingers brushed her briefcase where she had hidden her trump card. She had prepared for this. She had anticipated the manipulation, and now she was ready to turn the tables completely. I'm not just your daughter anymore. Jasmine continued the words, slipping out with a quiet power that made the room feel smaller, more suffocating. I'm your primary creditor, and I'm the one who's going to walk out of here, not you. You've underestimated me for too long. You thought I was the weak link, the easy target, but I'm not. Not anymore. The sirens outside grew louder, the sound of flashing lights growing nearer. But Jasmine wasn't afraid. She was ready. Ready to expose her family's lies, ready to show them just how wrong they were about her. Her gaze moved to her father, the arrogant man who thought he could control everything, who thought he could manipulate the system and use the law to his advantage. You can't play me anymore, Dad, she said, her voice icy. This is your last move, and you've already lost. The weight of her words hung in the air as the sound of police approaching filled the room. But Jasmine wasn't worried. She had already thought ahead. Her family thought they were the ones who held the power, but Jasmine had been playing the long game. She had known the risks, and now she was in control. As the door burst open, Jasmine raised her hand, tapping her smartwatch to send the signal she had been waiting for. She had one last move to make, and it was going to change everything. The door exploded inward with a deafening crash, and the police rushed and weapons drawn. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her heart was steady, her mind calm as she stood there watching the chaos unfold. Her family, her so-called family, was scrambling now. Marcus and Caleb both stood frozen, caught in the headlights of the situation they had tried to control. The game had changed, and they hadn't even realized it. Jasmine's smartwatch beeped, and the officers immediately shifted their focus. They were no longer looking at her as the threat. They were looking at the two men who had orchestrated this nightmare. Jasmine had already sent a live feed from the house's interior cameras to dispatch, exposing everything, every lie, every manipulation. The officers now had real-time access to everything that had been happening inside. Every word, every action was now documented. Her father's face went pale as he registered what was happening. The moment he realized that the police knew the truth, that they could see the surveillance footage, the falsified 911 call the way Eleanor had staged her own victimhood, his bravado crumbled. Caleb looked like he might lunge, but a pair of officers were already on him, forcing him to the ground, the knife falling from his grip with a metallic clatter. Eleanor, still clutching the landline, looked more frantic than ever. But Jasmine didn't move. She stood her ground, watching the chaos unfold with a sense of finality. This wasn't just about the house or the debt. It was about breaking free from the hold her family had over her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was reclaiming her life, her freedom, her sanity. The officers took control quickly, handcuffing Marcus and Caleb as they read them their rights. Jasmine could hear her father mumbling, trying to regain his composure, trying to find some angle, some way to escape, but it was over. They were caught exposed, and there was no coming back. Eleanor was next. She screamed when the sheriff showed her the footage of the call she had made, the one that had tried to frame Jasmine. It was a Class 4 felony, and there was no escaping that truth either. Jasmine watched as her family was led out in handcuffs. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike, but it was happening. The house, the one that had once felt like a sanctuary, was now a symbol of everything she had fought against. She wasn't just walking away from her past, she was burying it. As the last of the officers left, Jasmine sat down, her legs weak beneath her. The storm outside was still raging, but the tension inside the house had lifted. She took a deep breath, the weight of what had just happened settling over her. It wasn't just the legal victory, the financial freedom, it was the realization that she had finally severed the toxic ties that had bound her for so long. Looking out the window at the falling snow, Jasmine couldn't help but reflect on how much she had changed. For years, she had seen her family through a fog of guilt, seeing them as victims of circumstance. But now, as she watched them being driven away in the back of a police car, she understood something clear and final. Family wasn't supposed to be a prison. It wasn't supposed to be a game of survival. Her family hadn't been there to protect her. They hadn't been the ones who loved her unconditionally. In the end, they had been the ones trying to destroy her. And now, they were the ones who would pay the price. Jasmine stood up, a quiet strength in her eyes as she made her way to the door. The house, the debt, the manipulation. It was all behind her now. The future was waiting, and for the first time in her life, It felt like it was truly her own. As Jasmine walked away from the wreckage of her family's lies, she couldn't help but wonder, how far would someone go to control another person, to twist the very bonds of family for their own gain? It's a question we all have to ask ourselves, especially when the people we trust most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. Family is supposed to be a source of support, but sometimes it's the very thing that can keep us trapped. If you've ever found yourself questioning the motives behind someone's actions or felt the weight of toxic relationships, Jasmine's story is a reminder that sometimes the only way to truly be free is to break away. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's always more to uncover, more stories that need to be told. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for what's next.